The mail carrier stopped me at the end of my own driveway on a Tuesday morning in October, and the look on her face made me forget I was already running late. "I'm sorry to bother you," Gladys said. She glanced toward my front door and then back at me with the careful caution of someone about to say something they're not sure they should. "Can I ask you something personal?" I told her, of course. She has delivered my mail for 9 years. She brought a casserole after my husband passed. She knows my habits the way long-acquainted people know things, quietly, without being asked. "Do you know who goes inside your house on Tuesday mornings? After you leave?" The October air went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. I should tell you about my Tuesdays, because they matter. For the past 4 years, I have spent every Tuesday morning at the Riverside Community Literacy Center, where I help adults learn to read. I was a school librarian for 31 years before I retired at 64, and when my husband Arthur died 18 months ago, that volunteer work saved me. It gave my weeks an anchor. I leave at 9:15, sharp, and I am back by 2. My house is a 2-story colonial in eastern Ohio. I have lived here for 28 years. I raised my son here. I buried Arthur from this living room. It is not just a house, it is the accumulation of a life. Our wedding photographs on the landing. Arthur's gardening books organized by season in the study. The kitchen window where I have watched the same maple tree go through 30 springs. I live alone now. My son, who is 41, lives 20 minutes away with his wife of 4 years. I love my son. His wife is another matter, though I tried for a long time not to let it be. I want to be fair. When they married, I told myself my job was to be the kind of mother-in-law who didn't make herself a cliché. She was pleasant at dinners. She called on my birthday. She offered once to help me organize the pantry, and I let her, and afterward I noticed the cans had been rearranged in a way that didn't suit my kitchen, but I didn't say anything. She was attentive to my son in a way that made him happy, and his happiness was enough for me. Helpful. That was the word I kept using about her, privately to myself. She was always very helpful. In the months after Arthur died, she stepped up in visible ways. She came with my son on most Sunday visits. She asked careful questions about my finances. Not intrusively. She was never intrusive, just gently. Was I finding everything manageable? Had I looked into whether Arthur's pension was set up correctly? She knew a financial planner, she said, if I ever wanted a second opinion. I thanked her and said I had an attorney I trusted, a man named Clayton, who had handled our affairs for 15 years. She nodded and didn't push. I thought she was being kind. I was grieving, and I accepted kindness wherever it arrived. Standing in my driveway in October, listening to Gladys, I thought back through the past several months with a different kind of attention. A yellow notepad I keep on my desk, always in the same spot, left of the lamp. I remembered coming home one Tuesday to find it slightly right of where I'd placed it, and I'd assumed I'd set it down wrong in the morning. My reading glasses, which I always leave on the side table by the front window. Once I'd found them on the kitchen counter, and I'd laughed to myself about getting old. The ceramic tin on the top pantry shelf, where I keep a small emergency reserve. Arthur's habit, which became mine. I hadn't counted it in a while. I thanked Gladys. I drove to the literacy center. I taught my morning session on pure autopilot, and the moment I got home at 2, I went to the pantry. I keep $160 in the tin. I filled it in August and hadn't touched it. I counted what was there. $120. I counted again, then a third time, slowly bill by bill. $40 was gone. I sat at my kitchen table and thought about all the things I had dismissed in the previous months as the ordinary fog of grief, of aging, of a quiet house. The filing cabinet in the study, where I keep the deed to the house, insurance policies, Arthur's pension records, my will, the beneficiary designations on everything. I had once found it with one drawer not quite flush. I'd thought I had been distracted when I closed it last. The slightly open desk drawer I was certain I'd shut. The faint sense, on several Tuesdays, that something in my house had been breathed on while I was gone, though I could never have explained that feeling to anyone without sounding exactly the way I was afraid of sounding. Old, confused, unreliable. I had not been distracted. I had not been confused. I had been watched. That evening, I didn't call my son. I was afraid of what he would tell his wife when he hung up with me. Instead, I called my neighbor Winona, who lives across the street and who has been my closest friend in this neighborhood for 15 years. She came over with her reading glasses and a pot of chamomile tea and listened to everything without once looking at me with that particular worried expression I had grown to dread, the one that means I wonder how much of this is real. "You need a camera," she said when I finished, "before you do anything else, before you call anyone." The next morning, I drove to an electronics store 20 minutes away, specifically because I didn't want to run into anyone who knew me. A young man there walked me through the options patiently, without making me feel foolish. I bought a small device, no larger than a deck of cards, that could record 12 hours of footage and connect to a laptop. I paid with my debit card and drove home. It took me 2 days to get it right. Winona sat beside me at the kitchen table while I practiced, the two of us reading the instructions aloud and arguing gently about where to position the lens. We finally tucked it behind a row of Arthur's field guides on the bookshelf in the front hallway, angled toward the door. From there, it would see anyone who came inside. The following Tuesday morning, I pressed the small button on the device's side. A red light blinked twice, then went dark, as the instructions said it would. I gathered my bag, positioned everything, and left the house at 9:15 as always. I drove to a coffee shop 6 blocks away. I asked Gladys to text me when she saw the silver SUV. At 10:18, my phone buzzed. They just pulled in. I ordered a second cup of coffee I didn't drink. The next 90 minutes were the longest I can remember sitting still since the morning Arthur died. At noon, I drove home, went inside, took the camera from the shelf, and connected it to my laptop at the kitchen table. I pressed play. They came through the front door with a key, my son's key, his copy, which his wife had evidently copied without telling him. My daughter-in-law moved through the hallway with the efficiency of someone who has rehearsed the route, who knows exactly how much time she has. Behind her came a woman I recognized from photographs at their wedding, her college friend Jolene, who my daughter-in-law had once described to me as the most organized person I know. Neither of them hesitated. They went directly to the study. I watched my daughter-in-law pull open the filing cabinet, the one I'd found with the drawer not quite flush, and begin removing folders one by one. Jolene set up a small phone stand on Arthur's desk. They photographed documents with the systematic efficiency of people who have done this before. My will, my homeowner's insurance policy, the deed to the house, Arthur's pension documentation, the beneficiary designation on my life insurance. "She updated this about 3 years ago," my daughter-in-law said at one point, holding up a folder. "Clayton mentioned it to Harris at the firm dinner." Clayton is my attorney. I felt my stomach turn over. "Does she know he said anything?" Jolene asked. "No, it came up in conversation. He wasn't careful." A pause. "It doesn't matter for now. We just need to know what we're looking at." They spent 20 minutes in the study. Then they moved to the kitchen. My daughter-in-law opened the pantry and reached for the tin on the top shelf. She lifted the lid, counted out a small number of bills, and put the tin back with the precision of someone who has done it before and knows to leave it undisturbed. Business-like, practiced. Then Jolene looked at her phone and said, "Harris is almost there, I think, about the oversight idea." My daughter-in-law made a short sound, not quite a laugh, but close. "She's not even that forgetful. I've had to work at it." I stopped the video. I sat at the kitchen table in the quiet of my own house and I did not cry. I was past the territory of tears. What I felt was something colder and more clarifying, the kind of stillness that comes when the thing you hoped wasn't true turns out to be true, and you understand that the only thing left to decide is what you're going to do about it. My son had been told, slowly and carefully by his own wife, that his mother was declining, that she was forgetful and scattered and increasingly unable to manage. He had believed it, not because he was greedy or cruel, but because he loved her, and because the lie had been told in small, patient pieces in the soft language of worry and concern. I made copies of the footage on 3 separate drives before I did anything else. One I kept in the house. One went to Winona with instructions not to give it to anyone without a phone call from me. One I mailed to Clayton's office that same afternoon with a handwritten note asking him to call me privately and not to mention it to anyone connected to my son. Clayton called early the following morning. His voice had that careful quality attorneys' voices get when they're looking at something serious. "Tell me everything," he said. I told him. The footage, the missing cash, the documents they'd photographed, what my daughter-in-law had said about Clayton himself, that she'd gathered information from my son without my knowledge or consent, using my attorney as an unwitting source. "The checks," he said when I finished. "Go to your bank today. Ask for a full accounting of all check activity for the past year." I went that afternoon. The branch manager, a woman I've worked with for years, spread the records on the desk between us, and her expression shifted from polite attention to visible alarm about halfway down the second page. 3 checks, written over 8 months, $180, $210, $245. My signature on each. I had not written any of them. When the manager had finished reviewing everything, I showed her a portion of the camera footage on my laptop. She called the bank's fraud department from her desk with me sitting across from her, and by the time I drove home, I had a fraud report, a case number, and a stack of documentation in my bag. I sat in my kitchen that evening, and I thought about my son. I needed to know what he knew, and I needed to know before lawyers and police proceedings removed the choice from both of us. I called him and asked him to come for dinner Thursday. Just him. Pot roast, his favorite, nothing elaborate. I said I needed some time with him, mother and son. He said yes right away, in the warm, uncomplicated way he's had since he was a boy, and it almost broke me. He arrived with wine and a good mood, and I let the first hour pass normally. The maple tree, his work, a friend's upcoming wedding, normal conversation. I poured the wine and served the food and let him be happy for a little while, because I knew what I was about to do to his evening. Then I opened my laptop and turned it toward him without explanation and pressed play. I watched my son's face while he watched the video. It didn't change quickly, the way faces change when something shocks them. It changed slowly, the way a face changes when something confirms a fear it had been suppressing. When his wife's voice said I've had to work at it, I saw something extinguish in his eyes. He was quiet for a long time after it ended. "The tin," I said, "and there are 3 checks I didn't write." I showed him the bank records. He sat with them for a long time, his hands very still on the table. "Did you know she was coming here on Tuesdays?" I asked. "No, flat, certain." "Did you give her a copy of your key?" A pause. "She said she borrowed it once to drop off something when I was traveling. She said she returned it." He set down the papers. "I didn't know, Mom." "I believe you." "She told me you were getting confused, that you'd left the stove on twice, that you'd been mixing up your medications." He stopped. "None of it happened, did it?" "None of it." He looked like someone standing in the wreckage of something he'd been assured was solid. "She talked about getting you some help, said she'd been looking into options. I thought she was being. I thought it was." He stopped again. I reached across the table and put my hand over his. "I need you to decide something right now, before I take any next steps." He straightened in his chair. He looked at me directly. "Tell me what you need." What I needed was a witness, someone who could say from personal knowledge that he had been deceived along with me, and who would be willing to say so on record. My son agreed without hesitation. By 10 o'clock that night, Clayton had been fully briefed, a police report had been filed, and my son had called a divorce attorney. Jolene gave investigators a statement within a week. She said she had understood it to be informal help, that my daughter-in-law was simply trying to build a case for a necessary transition. She had not understood, she claimed, that the checks were forged, or that the plan was to have me declared legally incompetent. I believe this was true. People help with the pieces they're handed and don't always ask what the finished picture is supposed to be. My daughter-in-law's own text messages told the fuller story. The plan had been to document my supposed decline, cultivate my son's concern, pursue power of attorney, and use that access to liquidate enough of my assets to finance a property purchase. All before I understood what was happening. 3 forged checks and 47 minutes of video footage ended that plan. She was arrested on a Monday morning. My son called me from his driveway the moment it happened, his voice unsteady in a way I hadn't heard since he was a teenager. He said, "It's done," and I said, "None of this is yours to carry." A gerontologist named Dr. Pamela Osei, whose name I found through a social worker at the Literacy Center, because these networks of people who look out for the vulnerable are wider than you'd expect, spent 4 hours with me conducting a full cognitive assessment. She was methodical and unhurried, and she treated me like a person with full authority over her own story. Her report was unambiguous: no cognitive decline, above average performance across all assessments, full capacity to manage her own affairs. My daughter-in-law did not plead guilty. She argued that the checks had been written with my implied consent, that she had been managing my affairs informally and at my invitation, that any confusion about the finances reflected my own declining state. She was, it must be said, a convincing advocate for this story. Her attorney was not prepared for Dr. Osei's report, the camera footage, my son's testimony, or the bank's fraud analysis. The jury was out for less than 4 hours. She was convicted of theft by deception, forgery, and unauthorized use of a financial account. The judge sentenced her to 28 months and ordered full restitution plus $40,000 in damages to me. Jolene, who cooperated fully with investigators, received probation and restitution. The civil judgment exists as a permanent record that follows them wherever they go. I donated half of the settlement to an elder financial abuse prevention program in our county. The other half went into an account for my grandchild. The baby my son and his girlfriend are expecting in April, 8 months after his divorce was finalized. He planted 2 new maples in the front yard last fall to replace the one that had to come down, and he did the work himself in November in the cold, which is the kind of thing you do when you're trying to say something you don't have words for yet. The hardest thing to admit, the truest thing, is that for a while I almost believed the story being assembled about me. Not the version told in court, but the quieter one, delivered in small doses through offhand comments and concerned expressions. "You seem tired lately. Is everything okay? Are you sure you're managing all right?" I would find the notepad moved and think, maybe I did move it. Maybe I am more scattered than I realize. Maybe my grip on things is loosening in ways I can't see from the inside. Maybe they're right. The doubt they plant in you about your own perceptions is the most effective tool in this kind of scheme, because it works from inside your own mind, and they don't have to do anything to maintain it. You do it for them. I know my own house. I know my own mind. I knew both of those things all along, and the only mistake I made was taking longer than I should have to trust that knowledge over the gentle, persistent pressure of people who needed me not to. Gladys still stops at the end of my driveway sometimes, not to check on me, just to wave and ask about the new trees. I told her once that what she did that October morning changed everything, and she shook her head and said she'd only asked a question. I let her believe that, because she needed to. But asking the right question, at the right moment, to the right person, that is not a small thing. If something in your life feels wrong, trust that feeling before you dismiss it. Count the money. Check the drawer. Write things down. Find the one person who will listen without that worried look and tell them everything. Then document and do not wait. You are not confused. You are not imagining things. You are paying attention. That is not a weakness. That is the whole of it.